based on just purely because one politician or one celebrity basically sharing it. And I think that's where the confusion is.
Let me just have a final question with Amber, then let's open up the floor for questions. Amber, so let's come to Pakistan quickly. And I'll ask you a really easy question. Do you think it's possible to do journalism in Pakistan if you're not serving A, B, or C?
Probably very difficult. I do think that it's very difficult. And I want to sort of expand on what Azad said as well. What is the functions of it? What does a journalist do? At the bottom of the pyramid, if you look at it as a pyramid, news gathering, then it's verification, then it's processing, then it's distribution, and then it's opinion shaping. At the moment, we think of journalism just as the opinion shaping. Those are the content creators who actually use the work that the news gathering and the verification work that's being done by reporters, which is extremely important, which people still rely on, which content creators or analysts and commentators rely on. So I think that from what I've seen, when I read newspapers, when I look at television, it honestly just runs a lot of press conferences. I don't see any, there's most of it is filled not with original work or news gathering, it's a lot of press conferences. However, I do want to add that also people tune in when there are big events. So, for example, I'd say again, I'll just go back to the Pakistan-India conflict. You had a real bump in viewership because people were interested. It's event related. You also had a bump in viewership with Gul Plaza. It's very event based because what mainstream media has as an advantage over smaller digital platforms like Nukta is that they have a larger network of reporters who can do the verification and news gathering. But at the same time, I think with audiences becoming fragmented and really looking to content creators and opinion shapers to not inform their view, but actually say what they want to say, or because they like them, because they've developed a parasocial relationship with them. Which is what I think with the mainstream media or in Pakistan, I think that would be anchors such as yourself, right? Or vloggers who are incredibly popular. And we forget that there is actually an appetite and an audience for that verification and that news gathering. It's still there. It's still very much there.
Can I just add a point? Your pyramid is a very good analogy, but I would also say that the role of a good journalist is the investigative function, which, the revelatory. There are many scandals and injustices and, humanitarian disasters in the world that are worthy of revelation, and I think that still the role of a good journalist is to shine a light on these injustices. It's not just, the verification of the news cycle and so on, and also accountability, holding leaders to account, either through, robust interviews or, getting access to them and challenging them on their views. So accountability of our leaders is also something that the journalists should do. And revelatory, and I say this because yes, we're talking about the Gaza crisis, but in fact, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world is getting very, very little attention, which is the Sudan and the conflict there. 70,000 dead in Gaza, of course it's a disaster, but 200,000 dead in the Sudan, and the fighting is continuing, and the women are continuing to be raped, and the girls, and the boys for that matter. Huge food insecurity. Now, where is the journalist in all that? So there is a function for the journalist, very difficult to report there. But there are people who are trying to build up a bit of a picture. So when we talk about the role of the journalist, this revelatory function and shining a light on forgotten conflicts or prisoners of conscience or whatever is a very, very important part of what we do.
Although holding leadership to account comes with a fair amount of risk also. So we need to factor that in. All right, let's open the floor to questions. Please do identify who you're directing the question to. So let's start from that side. G. G. Now, mic दीजिएगा जी इधर. वो है पीछे उनको मैंने आइडेंटिफाई किया जी आप बोलिए जब तक माइक आ रहा है आप बोलिए सॉरी एक सेकंड वो पीछे मैंने उनको रिकॉग्नाइज किया उसके बाद मैं आपके पास आता हूँ जी Ji, please.
So we have seen that polarization has become a business for the media industry. So why do conflict-driven narratives attract more audience than solution-based reporting?
Who are you asking the question? Anybody? नहीं आप किससे पूछ रहे सवाल है कोई भी कर
Oh, it's to me. I think that's a very, very good point. That you know, when you go through the media and so on, it's all very negative. I mean, that's the nature of news, is that it favours the negative. You know, a person crossing a road safely is not news. A person crossing a road getting killed by a car is news. So the inherent nature of news is that it focuses on the difficult, the negative and so on, for the reasons I set out. But I think if that people are fed a relentless diet of conflict and problems and so on, it is quite depressing. I mean, you know, you look at the news and you know, you want to go away and just sit in a dark room and, you know, just worry about the whole world. So I think you're absolutely right. There is a place for saying these are, you know, solutions, particularly when you're covering stories in an economic way. If there are, you know, economic crises somewhere, you can show how people are trying to do something about it, or a humanitarian crisis, you know, the emergency response rooms in Sudan that I mentioned, and what they're trying to do to help people in need. So I think you're right, we shouldn't just present a diet of despair. So I agree with you.
I'd like to weigh in on that if I could. So human nature, let's look at human nature. People like stories. And in a story, there's always a hero and a villain. And there's a conflict between that hero and villain. And actually, I would argue that audiences prefer conflict. They don't want solutions. I'll give you an example. At Nukta, we also do a lot of analysis, explainers. Explainers are less emotional. It's less about the hero and the villain and what the solution could be. It does not get as much views and likes as much as viral clips and conflict. So I'd say that it goes back to human nature and the preference for a story in which there is a conflict. And hopefully we kind of hope that they will stay to the end for the solution, but that's not necessarily the case. So I do think it's very much on audiences.
Jim.
My name is Samyata. My question is to anybody in the panel who would like to answer. You are all experienced journalists and you know your industry very well. The positives and the negatives, incentives and the disincentives that you have. So is this only about reportage, or does an individual journalist also have some notion of what the individual journalist responsibility is? I understand reportage can be good, it can be bad. As Madam, you said that, you know, it's their job to shine a light on obscure things that are happening and to hold your policymakers and your leaders accountable at a huge cost, like you say, likely huge cost. But when you sit down to write, or when you sit down to report on something, you are alone with your writing pen and your own conscience. So at that moment, does a journalist feel some responsibility? I'm just asking this question.
That's a good question. Who wants to take that? Azad, you want to take that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, I think I can only speak personally that when I write a piece or do something like an investigation, of course I'm always nervous that I have made a mistake after writing the piece. And it's not just about nervous about making a mistake in terms of facts, but it's also about making sure that I've, told the story accurately. So I'm less worried personally. I'm less worried about my personal